This happened during summer about 2 years ago, when I was just a new recruit working nights at the hospital. On this particular day, I was dealing with patients in the emergency ward. Several ambulances came in, and one of the patients was a regular at our hospital. The doctor on duty said he needed the patient's clinical records from the internal medicine outpatient clinic, so I went to get them. The emergency ward and outpatient clinics were some distance apart, and it took about 5 minutes to get there. It was night, so all the lights were off, and I had to take a torch to see. I was used to it, but I still found it somewhat creepy. I set off to find the files. When I finally got there, I opened the door and turned the lights on. Hospitals at night are really creepy. They're a place where people die, so you become kind of sensitive to spirits. I tried to think of fun things, like where I'd go for my next vacation, as I searched for the file. When I finally found it, I turned around to leave and noticed there was a fallen file by the open door. It was the patient record for one Yamanaka-san. Was this here before? I wondered, and went to put it back where it came from. Then the phone suddenly rang. At this time of night? I thought, but I reached out and nervously picked it up. "Look," a voice whispered. The color drained from my face, and I fled from the room as fast as I could. When I got back, I told my colleague what had just happened. She turned pale and told me a story of her own. Apparently, there was a medical intern called Yamanaka who had, until recently, been working at the hospital. They found him hanging in the toilets one night, a large smile on his face. Was that voice on the phone his? What on earth did he want me to look at? Was there, perhaps, something inside his medical records? Hey guys, I'm your host, Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to another episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Did you know that we also have a YouTube channel? You can find Kowabana at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan. I'm currently working my way through the PlayStation visual novel Gakko de atta kowai hanashi es, which, to the best of my knowledge, has never been translated into English before. I'm also working on other Japanese horror games, as well as other stuff you can only find on the channel. Check us out at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for even more exclusive Japanese horror content. This week, we're looking at some stories that are the bread and butter of the Japanese horror genre. Yurei, or Japanese ghosts. Yurei hauntings can take all different shapes and forms, and, as you'll see in this next story, the ghost doesn't necessarily have to be lurking behind you to be terrifying. This one's called Changing Ghost Photo. This took place when I went to a training camp to get my driver's license during the summer holidays of university. Most of the other participants were the same age as me, so we stayed up late each night chatting. At first, we talked about university and our private lives, and laughed about popular entertainers. But then one night, we started talking about scary experiences we'd had. Nothing particularly scary had ever happened to me, but I did have some kind of sixth sense when it came to the supernatural. I don't think that's very common in most people, so I didn't find the stories they shared to be especially scary. The next day, I chatted with the instructor while we were on a test drive. We shared scary stories last night, but I didn't find any of them particularly scary. The instructor then shared a story with me. When he was done, he said, "And if you try to tell someone this story over the phone, every single time, the phone will hang up." I found it a little creepy, but at the same time, I didn't take him very seriously. Training camp ended uneventfully, and several years passed. I borrowed my parents' car and went to the amusement park with a friend. It was already getting dark by the time we made our way back home. It was near the end of summer, and we chatted about how the days were getting shorter. Then, my friend suddenly started to tell me a scary story. While she was talking, I remembered the story the driving instructor had told me. I shared it with my friend. It goes as follows. When the instructor's niece was in her early 20s, she got her license, and the first thing she did was take a trip to a nearby hot spring. She stayed overnight with 2 friends. They took lots of photos, but when they got home, they noticed something strange in one of them. There was a waterfall in the background. Next to the girls, they could see an extra pair of legs in the water. They weren't very clear, but they were undoubtedly legs. Creeped out, they gave the photo to the instructor, who then took it to a friend at a bar. The owner was one of his good friends, and so he asked the owner if he knew anyone that he could talk to about the photo. He got in contact with the person, and they agreed to meet at the bar, so he left the photo there with the owner. The instructor arrived at the arranged time, but when he looked at the photo again, he was shocked. Besides the legs, this time he could see a face behind the waterfall. The photo was changing. What else could it be? A chill ran down his spine. When the man he was introduced to looked at the photo, his face turned pale as well. "I can't do anything with this," he said. "I'll introduce you to someone who can. He'll be able to point you in the right direction." The instructor and bar owner were slightly flustered, but there was nothing else they could do, so they arranged a new meeting for a different day, and the bar owner sealed the photo away inside one of the bar's shelves. The next time they looked at it, the waterfall had changed into a black face that spread out through the water. Even the bar owner was shocked at how much it had changed. "There is an ominous energy residing within this photo," the new person they were introduced to said. "It might take some time, but if you leave it with me, I'll cleanse it for you." He apparently held a service for the photo. Having seen the changes take place before his very eyes, the instructor fully believed he'd been witness to a ghost photo and grew scared. After that, whenever he took a trip near water, he made sure not to take any photos near there. As I was telling my friend the story in the car, when I reached the part about the 3rd time they looked at the photo, a strange noise crackled inside the car and then disappeared. My friend jumped and then froze. Then I remembered the part about how if you told the story over the phone would always hang up. And I broke out in goosebumps all over. A few months after I moved to Japan, I was living alone in my apartment. It was late at night and I was attempting to cut an orange in the kitchen when the knife slipped and went right through my thumb, taking out a large chunk of it in the process. My first reaction was, "Oh," quickly followed by panic. I called one of my Japanese friends who arrived to find me covered in an amount of blood I can only describe as immense. She drove me to the emergency section of the nearest hospital, where they jabbed me with several needles before finally succeeding in numbing my thumb enough to sew it up. Other than the doctor's unsuccessful attempts with the needle, I always remember how dark and eerie the hospital was at night. It was probably around 1 a.m. by the time I got out of there, and the only other people I saw walking around the very dimly lit corridors were the nurses. In this next story, a young man falls ill and is hospitalized, eventually making friends with the old man in his room. There's one room in particular that creeps him out, however, and things are only about to get worse. Find out what happens in the supposedly empty room. A few years ago, I fell ill and was hospitalized. It was a regular city hospital that you might see anywhere, and I was admitted to the internal medicine ward. I was only there for a month, but the ward was filled with elderly patients suffering from dementia, so at night the building was filled with the sounds of their loud voices as they wandered around. I was admitted to a 4-person room, but fate smiled upon me, and I was the only person there, so I had a huge room all to myself. A week passed before someone else came. I didn't know what was wrong with him, but he was an elderly man who seemed healthy. He liked to talk, and I had nothing else to do, so we passed the time chatting. I was hospitalized for spontaneous pneumothorax, which is where holes suddenly appear in the lungs. That meant that, for a while, I couldn't move. So until the elderly man arrived, I was comfortable, but also kind of lonely. I was happy to finally have someone to talk to. I'd never seen a ghost before, so I didn't really believe in the supernatural, but I really liked watching horror movies. Thinking that watching them in a hospital room would make them even scarier, I asked my family to rent some movies for me, and when night fell, I put them on to watch. It might be a little rude, but no doubt, watching a horror movie in a hospital was scarier than watching one at home, and I couldn't go to the toilet during the night. I told my new roommate about that as well. There was a nurse at the hospital who said she could see ghosts, and I once heard her talking about the spirit of a child she saw in another room. For sure, that room had a creepy feel to it, but it wasn't like I could see anything, so it didn't bother me. Although, at night that area was so scary that I couldn't even go near it. 3 weeks passed, and I was feeling good enough to move around on my own, when my roommate took a turn for the worse. He lost his appetite and started eating less and less. He used to stand at the end of my bed as we chatted all day, but he stopped coming for that as well. Even to the untrained eye, the speed of his deterioration was scary, and finally he was unable to get up anymore, and he developed jaundice. Of course, he was in no condition for me to keep approaching, and he pressed the call button for the nurses over and over when he was in pain. A few days later, he was moved to the room the child ghost was said to reside in. I was alone again, and worried about whether the old man was okay. That same night, I heard him frequently calling the nurses. When you press the call button, you can hear a sensor go off in the nurses' center, and a red light goes off in front of the room. One night, a few days before my discharge from hospital, I couldn't sleep. There was a big fuss in the nurses' center, and some nurses, doctors, and machines rolled by to the old guy's room. They were followed by some people who looked like his family, and then I heard them crying. I knew that he had died. I'd only known him for a short time, but remembering all the conversations we shared, I cried too. Time passed the next day as though nothing had happened. I was sad that the old man passed away, but I tried to look forward to my own discharge from the hospital. But that night, I heard the familiar ping pong of the call button from his room. A nurse passed by to answer the call. I thought a new patient must be in there and peeked inside when the nurse opened the door. It was pitch black. Nobody was there. There was no nameplate on the door either. There's nobody here, so why did it ring? The nurse muttered as I passed, and as she went to close the door again, bing bong echoed throughout the dark room. I rushed back to my room and jumped into bed. The call button rang another 2 times after that. I convinced myself the machine must have been playing up and tried to sleep, but once again, bing bong. The button rang and the red light turned on. Both myself and the nurse knew that nobody was in there. Even so, the call button was still going. Even with my love of horror, I was terrified. After that, I was safely discharged from hospital, and although I'd never believed in ghosts until that point, it taught me that maybe there were some things beyond the reach of our world. There's a term in Japanese called ame onna for a woman who seems to bring the rain with her wherever she goes. It can be otherwise sunny and fine, but the moment she shows up, it starts to rain. In this story, it appears to be the other way around. Whenever it starts to rain, a mysterious woman appears. Who is she? And what does she want? Find out in Woman on Rainy Days. One of our friends moved house during university, so we made up some excuse and barged in to have a look around. The apartment was okay, what you'd expect to find a university student in, and wasn't terribly new, but it wasn't that old either. It was a 3-story building. There were narrow stairs at the entrance, and a hallway at the end leading to the rooms on the first floor. Past that was a parking lot. Our friend's apartment was in the corner on the second floor. A light rain fell that day, and we made our way to his apartment with booze and snacks from the nearby supermarket. We put our stuff down at the bottom of the stairs for a moment to put our umbrellas away, when suddenly, someone screamed. What? What is it? What's wrong? Oh, nothing. Someone just scared me. I followed my friend's gaze, past the stairs and down the hall to the car park. Ah, I thought. A lone woman was standing beneath the light at the end of the hall. She looked to be in her 30s or 40s, with long hair. Her whole body was covered in black. With her back to the darkness of the car park, it was like a white face floating in mid-air. She stood there, stock still, watching us. No, her face and eyes were facing us, but she wasn't looking at us. It was like she was staring off into space. Yeah, that is indeed scary, I thought. But we bowed our heads slightly in apology, and then went upstairs. The moment we got inside, we told him all about the woman. There's a creepy woman down there. Seriously, what the hell was she doing there? Maybe she doesn't even live here. If she lived here, then why wouldn't she go inside? We kept going, but then our buddy interrupted us. I just moved here, so quit it with the scary stories already. We started drinking and played video games, entirely forgetting about the woman downstairs. The night grew late, and eventually we finished everything we'd brought. Two of the other guys decided to go hit up the convenience store for more, while I'd stay back with the friend who owned the apartment. Not even 5 minutes had passed when the two of them suddenly came running back. We really should all go together. That woman's still down there. She's scaring me. Seriously? Our buddy was slightly creeped out, but also kinda drunk, so he agreed to go as a kind of test of courage. When we reached the bottom of the stairs, I turned to look down the hall, and the woman really was still there. She looked just the same as when we first arrived, staring off into the distance. How much time had passed since we first arrived? She must have been standing there like that the whole time. That wasn't normal. What the hell is up with her? We chatted as we walked to the convenience store. I suggested we say hello to her on our way back. I was full of alcohol, so I wanted to act big and tough. But when we returned, the woman was gone. How strange, we remarked, but inside I was secretly glad. We slept over that night and in the morning safely returned home. A short while after that, our buddy told us that he was thinking of moving again. Again? But you just moved in. That woman is still here. According to him, whenever it rained, that woman would be there, standing at the end of the hall. When it stopped raining, she disappeared, but he found it too creepy. Remembering what she looked like, I sympathized, but moving out simply because of that seemed a little too much. He said that he tried speaking to her. He was braver than I thought. I went up to her and said, "Hi, I've moved in upstairs. I'm sorry my friends were so noisy the other day." But she didn't say anything. She didn't even look at me. She was just staring at the roof or something the whole time, and not even listening to me. He questioned the real estate about it, but it was useless. It didn't matter if it was morning, noon, or night. If it rained, that woman was there, staring into the distance. Either way, it scared him, so our friend wanted to move as soon as possible. I don't think she's a ghost. I think she's a real person. But doesn't that make it even more scary? She just stands there all alone when it rains. I wonder why. In the end, he ended up moving out about 6 months later. He never found out who that woman really was. Maybe she's still standing there even now, beneath that light at the end of the hall, when it rains. Our last story for this week features some lost children, a terrible tragedy, and why you should always listen to your grandmother. This one's called Children Blocking the Way. When I was a child, owing to certain circumstances, I lived in the countryside of South N Prefecture with my grandmother. It was an empty place with nothing but rice fields all around. It wasn't very convenient if you ever needed to go shopping, but I passed the time happily, surrounded by the beauty of nature. There was a road several kilometers from our house, however, where people often had accidents. It was a long road, but for some reason, people always crashed in the same spot at night, and many people died. The road itself was well maintained, so I found it strange that accidents always occurred in that one spot. According to one person who crashed but survived, 5 children holding hands suddenly appeared, blocking the road. They crashed, trying not to hit them. I heard the following from my grandmother about that road. My grandmother, so your great-great-grandmother, told me this story. When your great-great-grandmother was a child, several children were killed on that spot. She lived in a different area, so she was safe. But several children were killed or went missing in the area. They never found the person who did it, so perhaps those children are angry and looking for the criminal. I was so scared after hearing her story that my mother scolded her. "Don't tell him such scary tales." But she kept going. Listen carefully. When you get older, if you're ever driving on that road and you see the children, you mustn't stop. Remember, if you see them, you can drive straight through them and you'll be fine. Okay? I grew scared of living in the countryside after that, and shortly thereafter, we moved to Osaka. I quickly became a big city kid, and my memories of my time in the countryside soon faded. As I entered my 30s, I got married and had 2 kids of my own. As the kids got older, they said they wanted to visit the countryside and play in the mountains and rivers. So during the summer vacation, I took some time off so we could go back to my grandmother's house. It was the first time for me to go back there since I was a kid. My grandmother had aged, but she was still energetic and healthy, and she was looking forward to spending time with her great-grandchildren. We set out late thanks to work, taking the highway and eventually arriving in N Prefecture. It was already pitch black around us. I drove carefully, relying on the car's headlights to see, when slowly I came to recognize my surroundings. I was struck with nostalgia and relief, when suddenly it happened. I saw something ahead of us. It looked like people, or at least I thought so. It was around midnight. What on earth would anyone be doing standing on the road at this time of night? As we got closer, the shapes became clearer. A group of children in kimonos, around 4 or 5 years old, were holding hands, blocking the road in front of us. "There's someone on the road! Stop the car!" my wife said, and I went to step on the brakes, but suddenly I remembered my grandmother's words. I stepped on the accelerator and drove straight for the children. "What are you doing?" my wife screamed, but we didn't hit anything. We passed right through them. "Stop the car. Let's go back and check." My wife's words brought me back down to earth, and I panicked, thinking I'd just committed some horrible crime. We went back, but there was nothing there. They really must have been the kids my grandmother spoke about, I thought. The kids were asleep in the back, so they were fine, but both my wife and I were terrified. We were unable to enjoy our time there, and despite the heat of summer, we felt nothing but chills right until the very end. I don't know what happened to them at the time, but I sure hope those kids can move on sometime soon. Don't forget to follow us at youtube.com/Kowabana Japan for for even more exclusive content. And thanks to our amazing patrons over at patreon.com/Tara A. Devlin, I should hopefully have a very exciting announcement for you all next week. Stay tuned. In the meantime, you can also join us in the Discord, which you can find in the description or over at Kowabana.net. Thanks guys, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to Kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to Kowabana.net now.